Keras is now actually an API in TensorFlow2. What this means is you will notice that the examples in the book are in this format where you can do import Keras, and then if you do Keras dot underscore underscore version underscore underscore, you will see the version of Keras. And if you want to use Keras this way, an example is from Keras.datasets, import Boston underscore housing. So you start by directly using Keras datasets or Keras dot whatever you want to do with Keras. With TensorFlow 2, actually, Keras now is a part of TensorFlow. It's an API within TensorFlow. So if you do it this way, then now you have to do TensorFlow.keras.version, and this gives you the version of Keras inside TensorFlow. Now, if you want to import the same data set, then you have to do TensorFlow.keras.datasets and then import Boston housing. Many times, I find many students very confused between these two. And between these two, which is this is Keras inside TensorFlow, and this is Keras standalone. Now, yes, I was saying that many times I find that many of us use these interchangeably or frequently get confused. The problem is when the two versions of Keras, that is the version of Keras inside TensorFlow and the version of Keras that you have installed independently are the same, then there's no problem. However, when the versions are different, for example, this is 2.2.4 and this is 2.2.5, and if you intermix the codes between these two, then your code may run into problems. To describe this more clearly, here's an example. Once you open your Google Colab, you can actually run pipe uninstall Keras to remove the Keras that's outside, that is the standalone Keras outside of TensorFlow. And then if you do import Keras, you will see that you will get module not found error. However, you will still be able to do import TensorFlow.keras because that will be a part of the TensorFlow library that you have inside. Overall, you just have to remember, no matter whether you use the Keras inside TensorFlow or the Keras standalone, you have to stick to one. In order to be compatible with TensorFlow, the practice nowadays is to use the Keras inside TensorFlow. But if you wanted to design code, write your code such that it's compatible outside of TensorFlow as well, then you can use the import Keras as shown in the book. Both of them are correct, but depending upon your needs, you may want to prefer one or the other way. To get Keras up and running, one very easy option is to simply use Google Colab, or if you don't like Google products, then you can use Microsoft Azure. But if you don't like either and you want to set up your own environment, then you can install everything locally too. This is usually a good idea when you have very frequent and heavy uses and large data sets, and if you have a good computer. Because on a slower computer, everything will run very slow. Now, for installing Keras, TensorFlow, Google Colab, not Google Colab, but Colab and everything locally, can be daunting. You first need to install the correct version of Ubuntu that your hardware supports. Sometimes Windows may not work as you might think. If you have GPUs with you, then you have to install the correct version of CUDA driver and CUDNN version. Your Python version and libraries all should match up. You want to install Anaconda and Jupyter Notebook as well. And then you need to set up TensorBoard if you want to use TensorBoard correctly. So setting it up in servers, particularly in Linux servers where you don't have a UI terminal, GUI interaction, can be daunting. But this is something interesting and exciting. So if you want to create a virtual environment, say for example using Oracle VM VirtualBox, then it is actually fun to try installing all of these things and set up and have your own Keras platform up and ready and running with Jupyter Notebook and a TensorBoard if you want to use TensorBoard as well. One common question that many people ask is, will you ever need to write your own TensorFlow code? That is, what the library offers you, is that sufficient? The answer is probably not. You probably never need to write your own TensorFlow code and simply always stick to Keras and be happy with what Keras provides you. However, sometimes you may be working on something very different from a typical machine learning problem. Um, in that case, you may need to write your own TensorFlow code. But usually, knowing how TensorFlow works is sufficient. You may need Python and NumPy skills, and those will never be sufficient because the more you know, the more efficient code you'll be able to write. You also need to know the features of Keras. Sometimes we think that Keras doesn't offer certain things, and then we start implementing our own, but Keras may have it. Keras may have the feature that you're looking for. One example is in my research, I had to code my own TensorFlow function when I needed a specific Hubbard loss. I wanted to calculate the loss between y true and y pred in a very specific way. And that's when existing existing Keras functions, not TensorFlow, Keras functions were not sufficient for me. So I had to design my own Hubbard loss to return the loss that I needed. This is not common though. For most of the implementations that we do, most of the problems that we solve today, we probably don't need to use TensorFlow code, and just sticking to Keras can probably keep you happy.